all. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I welcome you all to the TIE Global Sustainability Summit organized by TIE Hyderabad from India. I would love to take this opportunity, wonderful opportunity, to welcome a great panel for today's topic on affordable renewable energy for the bottom of the pyramid. We have the wonderful team here, Mr. Vinesh Shah, the founder and CEO of Path Hopes Energy, Mr. Mateen Abdu, CEO and founder of Grassroots Energy, Mr. Sandeep Singhal, co-founder of Nexus Venture Partners. I also take the privilege to introduce the wonderful moderator, a good friend of mine, Mr. Murli Talasila. He's a great friend of mine, and Murli leads an innovation practice at PwC India. He has over 22 years of experience in innovation, technology, and cyber architecture, new media, and in the content creation space that he has done a wonderful work. Over to you, Murli. All the best and good luck to all the team.
Hey, Bhanu, thanks a lot for the kind introduction and a warm welcome to my fellow panelists, Mateen, Sandeep, and Vinesh is to join. I hope we can kick off while Vinesh is still joining us. I hope everybody is able to hear me. Bhanu, can you just confirm? Perfect, thank you much. Our topic could be mouthful today, so I will minimize the words and call it energy poverty so that it's easy for all of us to pronounce and focus ourselves. What is energy poverty? You know, we heard various other varieties of poverty, and we're aware, being most of us are from this country, what poverty means and how it's all of us in the face many a time. The World Economic Forum defines energy poverty as the lack of access to sustainable modern energy services and products. To be more precise, it is not only a matter of sustainability. Energy poverty can be found in all conditions where there is a lack of adequate, affordable, reliable, quality, and safe energy services to support development. The problem with lack of access to energy is that it puts human beings in a never-ending cycle of poverty. It'll never let you come out. So despite the fact energy is engine of civilization, nowadays access to adequate, affordable sources and quality distributed across the planet is still a dream. And why do I say that? I say that because 1 billion people approximately do not have real access to electricity, and probably 3 billion out there do not have sustainable energy access. So this gives you a very good idea of what the topic here today we have and how we want to delve into it. And we'll also touch upon the environment aspect of it. We also speak about the alternatives my fellow panelists have innovated and scaled, and also bring the opportunities to the fore. What entrepreneurs and innovators can focus on to reduce and make the poverty a thing of the past. With that, I will start my firing round to my panelists. I will start with Sandeep. Sandeep, whatever I defined, a very bookish way of defining energy poverty, can you give me your perspective and what is your indulgence with it till now?
Murli, I think you made a very important point that energy poverty leads to ongoing poverty. I think that is a very critical aspect of this debate. Energy is effectively the starting point for most productive work. And if you don't have energy available to you, you will effectively not be able to generate the productivity levels required, either to have a sustainable life for yourself or provide to others. So, whether it is a farmer that needs power to get his water pump working for irrigating his fields, or whether it is the laborer who is making these chicks at night and needs light to work on it. So the nature of labor in sort of the economy fundamentally requires energy. And one of the challenges that we have seen is when we look at sort of markets outside of the main metros and so on. And this is true not just for, obviously developing economies face this a lot more. And India, as a sort of developing economy, has these pockets still that exist. But if you go to even places like in more developed countries, it still remains an issue. We have seen this issue of energy poverty in clusters where there is not enough money to pay for electricity. So those type of issues also happen. So broadly, the point that you raised is very valid. The interesting thing, and we'll go deeper into it, is that the nature of energy generation that we are seeing with renewables is actually very well suited to addressing this problem. So we can go into that in more deep later, but I think I'll just sort of stop here.
Great, that's a great kickoff for me, Sandeep. Martin, turning the focus onto you, if you would like to give your twist on the same question.
Yeah, so thanks for setting the context, Murali. We echo with the phrase ending energy poverty because that's the mission statement for Grassroots Energy. So one of the common things which we have seen in many of the emerging economies, whether it's in South Asia or in parts of Africa, is the aspirations of the people are increasing, and that's the common point all across the communities. So with that in context, we have also seen that there are various climate change issues which are also affecting the people who are at the vulnerable parts of the society. Especially in the last 3 or 4 years, we have seen the entire narrative on the energy change a bit, or rather moving up the ladder, if I can say that. A basic the discussion 3 or 4 years ago was just the basic lighting or basic appliances. Now we're talking about productive loads, how energy can enable, say, for example, agriculture, or for example, healthcare or education. So we're talking about how can enable the key parts of the day-to-day activities. That's why energy becomes like the bedrock for economic development. So with that as a backdrop, I think we can dwell deeper into it as we move forward.
Thanks a lot, Martin. And I will break down the discussion into deciphering this problem statement, Martin and Sandeep, using a typical SDG 7 terminology, which is access, modern, affordable and reliable, and for everybody. Last one being sustainable. These are the 5 aspects I want to delve. If you want to deep dive the anatomy of energy poverty, that's how I want to elevate it or break down the pieces into those things. So the first one which comes there, and specifically Sandeep pointed out when he said, even with a country like us where we claim 99% of our villages have access to electricity, there's still so many places where the access per se, the grid has reached, but it works when it wants to, and at a price probably not affordable by the people who want to consume it. So there is access, but it is not useful access. Given that as a problem statement, I want both my panelists to tell me or delve into the problem statement a little bit more. Martin and Sandeep. Martin, maybe you want to go a little bit. What are the problem statement? How people are attempting to solve the access part of it?
Yeah, so the phrase which you said that the electricity has reached some of the villages, let me spend a minute to explain what that means. So some of the transmission lines might have reached to the nearest location, and they ease some element of electricity which is provided. So that is that is true, but there is only so much which you can do with the kind of quality of power and the kind of phase which is available. So what we can do with in most parts, what people can end up doing is a basic lighting or a basic services. If you want to have any productive activities, what it means is running small and medium scale industries, any kind of activities related to agriculture or healthcare, etc., you need three-phase power, or a quality power needs to be reliable and sustainable so that the economic activities can be sustained. That's where the last mile decentralized energy solutions, whether it is mini grids or so home-based applications, can come in handy to play that complementing role so that the energy is available at the time when you need it and at the price which you can afford to pay. That is when the true solutions can be offered. There needs to be a lot of customization. A lot of players are playing a very active role in this space. There are a lot of interesting technologies and business models which are enabling that particular transition, even while the grid is present. In many of the places where we operate, grid is present and we are complementing those efforts.
Thanks, Matin. I'll deep dive into some of those questions, answers you've given. Over to Sandeep now.
I think, Murli, the way I look at it is there is centralized power and decentralized power. I think Mateen sort of refers to it. And when you talk about the grid, you're actually referring to centralized power, in my view, right? So what is the challenge with centralized power? So centralized power still doesn't have enough generation from renewables. So you are still depending on your fossil fuels, whether it is coal, whether it is gas, whether it is oil. It is still dependent on that, and therefore there is a constant issue of price fluctuation that we have to deal with. We are seeing that right now in the markets for both coal and gas. Coal and gas prices have just gone through the roof. Oil is headed that way, and that has a fundamental impact on the ability to deliver at the last mile. I think the point that Mateen made, that you may have the grid in the last mile, but if the generation side is not delivering for any reason, your grid is useless, right? So fundamentally, if I look at the point of discussion that we are having in terms of the bottom of the pyramid, there is a very strong requirement at this level to maintain price points and sort of give them a guarantee that they can run their sort of day-to-day operations or their lives or whatever in a certain way. They can't afford the fluctuations. You may be able to afford the fluctuations at a government level, but you can't change pricing at the individual level. And this is a problem today in sort of regulated environments. You can manage to keep your price at a certain level. The PSEB will take the losses. We have all our state electricity boards are dealing with losses because of that. So there is a fundamental issue on the centralized power model where you are running into these fluctuations, and therefore the inability to give a guaranteed either quantity or quality of electricity or energy to the end consumer. Now, if you think about this from a renewable standpoint, and I think Mateen again referred to a few points over here which had to do with, say, home systems or lighting and so on. There we are seeing solutions emerge which have an upfront cost. So there is a need for a capital outlay upfront. But once you have the capital outlay, your sort of marginal cost is known. In most cases, it is close to zero. There will be some cost associated with maintenance and so on, but not much, right? So in some ways, there is a interesting play here, which is what I mentioned at the start, that if you can go towards decentralized grids, what I think Mateen referred to as microgrids, there is a possibility to create an ecosystem of energy availability that is more aligned with what the bottom of the pyramid needs, which is consistency of pricing and availability.
Thanks much, Sandeep. And both speakers are alluding or pushing me to go to distributed energy sources and micro and nano grids. So can we spend a minute unraveling what exactly it means in the popular centralized grid terminology? Can we spend a minute? I request both of you. Mateen, you want to go first? Explain centralized versus decentralized, why and what a nano or microgrid means.
Yeah, so let's use the phrase either mini grid or microgrid. That's the terminology which ends up being used. It typically is defined as a 30 kilowatt system, which is widely if a number which is adopted by many of the existing operators. So what we have seen is over the last few years, the entire ecosystem has evolved, a lot of new players. In fact, there is a large utility who is betting big on that space. So it'll be interesting to see how things will unravel over time. So while mini-grids with the history of say a few hundreds of this on the ground operating for a few years, the reliability point is kind of well addressed. So people now know the quality of power and the reliability from mini grids is something which is better over grid, and people are willing to pay for that premium because it's available at the time when you need it. But there are certain challenges even with that approach. So while solar is an important or the key driver for the mini grids, is a significant amount of the challenge happens during the evenings and nights, where many of the mini grids are oversized because of the large battery banks, or for kind of peak loads, you still have reliance on diesel. So it's partly clean and partly not desired to be there, but then limited solutions to replace the fossil fuels. That's where a solution like us comes in. Our grassroots energy can generate decentralized bio-CNG or biomethane in places where it is required. So the calorific value is similar to that of diesel. We can replace the solution of fossil fuels with a clean energy, thereby making a transition to mini grids to 100% clean energy solutions. So that can also enable the point on affordability, because the overall cost of energy can be reduced significantly. So then it's a win-win for everyone, the operators, for the end users, and for the ecosystem.
Sandeep, your view, please.
I would add just to what Mateen said. I think this is, you have to think about this from a systemic perspective. He brought up, I think, 2 points here. One is there is a generation aspect of it, and then there is a storage aspect of it. So, generation, we took 2 examples of solar and biomass as the 2 sort of sources that one can look at it from a decentralized standpoint. But there is a second aspect, which, we talked about the battery banks around the need for storage, particularly in nighttime and evening time, as well as in times when there is not enough solar availability. So I think broadly solutions are known. I don't think that the issue is around the solutions being known. Is thinking through, and I have to give Mateen a lot of credit, right? That companies have to get created that are thinking of this in a systemic way and saying, okay, how do you bring all of these together to make the sort of delivery cost effective for the end user and be able to scale it? I think those are 2 key things.
So Sandeep, you're saying while technology and the fuel sources to power the microgrids exist out there, it's the financial models which need to be fine-tuned so that the beneficiaries actually get what they deserve. Okay.
There may not be, let's say there is not that much of you may reduce your cost of inputs, but your cost of capital potentially can be higher in these situations, which you have to factor in.
Okay. Mateen, you brought in the biomass or biofuels into the picture. Can you enlighten the audience on what are the various sources of biofuels? Because if you go back to the poorest of the poor in sub-Saharan Africa, biomass is just used for cooking, and that too in a very dirty and inefficient way. And even biomass is abused, if you will, right? And lots of calorific value is lost in the process. So can you unravel the sources and best methods of using biomass for energy generation?
Sure. So if you broadly look at it, step back and then look at what are the 2 broad sources, if you can look at where energy is a challenge. So one is solar, and then many of these locations, if not all, most of the locations have some form of agricultural dependency. Depends on the degree of dependency, but there is a significant agricultural activities. So that produces a lot of residue. So then you have 2 or 3 broad categories of fuels which are possible. One is you have biomass gasification, which you can burn a certain feedstocks using gasification solution. There are certain disadvantages that you cannot store the fuel for a long period of time. You need to use it when you generate it. And then you have second option of decomposition or the organic decomposition. That's the biogas. And biogas again is a very interesting fuel because you can do so much with biogas. With the raw biogas, you can use it for thermal applications like cooking, heating, etc., or you can generate electricity. But if you clean up the biogas, then it becomes like a natural gas grade. And the moment you have a natural gas grade fuel, so you have the same quality of fuel which people in cities end up using. If that quality of fuel is available, you can store it, you can transport it, you can use it for a long period of time. It can be a very good catalyst for peak loads or for the certain such situations. It could be complementing with solar. And then you have the biofuels, which is all your ethanols, etc., and that it can only be generated at a certain scale. So depending on the location, depending on the context, and depending on the needs of the particular application, so any of these three fuels can be used and deployed.
Thanks, Mateen. Sandeep, anything we're missing in the sustainable fuel space or energy space, which you want to add to the sources Mateen just highlighted?
Well, I think the key points are covered.
Great. Then I'll go to the next part, which is how do you perceive the policy and state of affairs where energy poverty is prevalent? It could be South Asia, Southeast Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, and some parts of South America. This is how the energy poverty crescent looks like, if you will, the shape where it is present very much. Are we doing enough? I'm part of the Startup Council in GAIL, which encourages biomass and biogas-centric startups. But other than that, I am not aware of anybody going out of their way to fund or support from a policy, funding, etc. perspective. And how do you see the status quo at this moment, and what else can we do or expect the governments to do in this space?
So, from our standpoint, I'll use the example of D-Light. So, we invested in D-Light more than a decade ago, and the company obviously has scaled across this crescent that you mentioned. They are in most of the geographies that you talk about. The key starting point for us was really around making products that people would be happy to pay for. So it would not require government intervention. It would really be a consumer-led consumption, a consumer-led product, which would allow for us to not have to worry about subsidies and so on. But even in that process, one of the learning was that there is a need to build out, even for this consumer product, need to build out distribution channels. And there's a price point issue in terms of the product that you're offering, and therefore what is the channel you can give in the margins that you can give into the channel, and so on. So we've actually seen a reasonable amount of support from foundations along the way. Obviously Shell and Total have both been very supportive in their efforts in Africa. We've seen Unilever actually work with us on a project in promoting education-led lighting solutions. We've seen, so I would say broadly, the money has come not necessarily from the government, but it has come from these, what earlier were sort of some of the dirty energy companies have moved into clean energy. And that transition is being, and their need to transition is helping support some of these changes. So, and I expect that to continue and actually grow. I'm seeing more and more activity from, you mentioned GAIL, right? So GAIL is looking at startups in the space. So I see large companies making efforts to address this particular issue.
Mateen, your viewpoint?
Yeah, so interestingly, in the last few years, a lot of effort has been put in terms of shaping or developing the policy. I think on the policy front, it is in place for the ecosystem to evolve and thrive. I think what is required now is actually on the support in terms of funding, especially if I can call it. These are typically infrastructure projects. What you need is a patient capital, is a long-term support for this new segment to actually emerge. So if I can call it any kind of support which is required, I think financing, especially the infrastructure projects, that is one of the biggest gaps. And that's where I believe some effort is required. Interestingly, some of the business models which are emerging, and we have seen these models can sustain without the need of subsidy, which is a encouraging thing. But I think, nevertheless, I think it's a funding which is one of the biggest bottlenecks in the space at this point of time.
Okay, thanks. And I would still like to spend a few more minutes, Sandeep and Mateen, on the policy side, because you folks, both of you pointed out most of the grid is centralized and the power is from the fossil fuels predominantly on the grid. Hence the dependence or the lack of predictability in the cost to the in the last mile. So if we have to reform the grid in some form or fashion, and also make microgrids and nanogrids a reality so that we don't have to pay license fees in some form or fashion, there should be some kind of policy intervention in the electricity distribution system, central grid system, licensing system. What are the problems you see if I want to set up, I don't know, maybe somewhere in the Northeast hinterland, a microgrid? Where do I start, and what are the things I would typically stuck, and what do you think the policy intervention should be?
I think mostly it actually starts by removing market distortions. If you are offering a subsidy, in some ways you are preventing some of the new technologies from actually getting deployed. We saw this very interesting behavior in the initial days of D-Light, where we were offering the product in India and also in Africa. And we did not see any pickup in India, and we saw a huge pickup in Africa. And the biggest difference was kerosene was subsidized in India and it was not subsidized in Africa. So the people made a choice and said, I'm spending this much on kerosene every month to light my hut. If I buy this D-Light, I'm paying one time, but then I don't have to pay again. And it just changed the behavior, right? So we don't realize this, that a lot of the market distortions are actually negatively impacting it. So just removing market distortions is a start.
Fantastic point. Mateen, over to you.
No, I think the point which you mentioned, there are certain pockets where you can even oversize mini grids. There is no reason why you can't have larger mini grids. We have seen in certain places where the mini grids of much bigger capacity, in places where the expansion might not happen from the grid, or it's not feasible or not. So in those places, I think mini grid can play a vital role of serving the local communities, and the surplus can be fed into the grid. So this is something which is tried by someone in the ecosystem. I think the initial results are encouraging. So it will be interesting to see how this complementing factor can actually be rolled out. That way, you have an universal adoption of availability of energy in the pockets where otherwise it would be very difficult.
Thanks, Mateen. While staying still a little bit on the biomass side, I'm aware that the pipe grid which GAIL runs encourages lots of startups which are into biomass to pump back or get a connection to the pipeline and pump it back after refining, as you said, Mateen, or bottle the gas and supply to the industries around. All models are possible. That's an innovation in a pocket, as I see, but that has to be done in a much larger scale. So I want to move forward in the discussion, Mateen and Sandeep, and switch to, okay, we have the lay of the land now, how the world looks like in terms of poverty. and what we're doing to elevate it. And there is a big buzz going on the whole ESG, and corporates are getting in a big way and trying to move away from the tick box centric CSR approach to real impact approach. Given all this, what do you think you folks would suggest the areas where startups can dabble in, or what would be a good point to start with? And then we eventually jump on to, once we discuss this, we'll jump onto the scaling and exit process in this space. Sandeep, over to you.
I think we started this discussion by saying that energy poverty is driven by the fact that it's continuous and there's a productivity element to it, right? So I think any entrepreneur that is thinking about playing in this space has to think about the end use and the economic value that is being created over there, and then work backwards from that. So if I look at it today, if I had to make a choice, I think Mateen made the point that I can bottle that gas, I can offer it to an industry. How will the industry use it? What is it that they're replacing? What's the cost, and so on. So if it starts with the economic argument, in my view. So if the end use economic argument is valid, I think it ultimately leads to scalability. So any entrepreneur should sort of try and understand, okay, if I'm getting into solar lighting, what is the use of that solar lighting in the market which I'm targeting? Will it generate extra income? Will it allow the end user to afford to pay for whatever I'm providing them, and then maybe buy more, right? So I think that's the starting point that I actually have seen, that founders end up focusing on the technology aspect rather than the sort of unit economics and the value added economics aspect in their thinking, and that has an impact on scalability eventually.
Sandeep, you're saying if anybody wants to create an innovation or entrepreneurship in this space, they need to understand what is the real impact they're creating for the end user or the consumer of that electricity, and start from there.
In rupee terms, right? So exactly this is the amount of value that this person will derive from every unit of energy that I provide. And that value is higher than what my cost to provide him of the energy is. And therefore, there is a winning game here.
That's very good articulation. Mateen, over to you.
Yeah, so I think when the previous minister, when he mentioned the phrase that India will be a gas economy over the next few years, I think we at Grassroots Energy echo that thought, because there's a significant amount of opportunity which is possible. And either you, like you mentioned, either you can feed into the grid, or you can serve pockets, either it is the communities or the local industries with the gas. So, and you can do multiple activities with that, right? So whether it is heating or cooking or for say mobility, you can use the gas for multiple purposes. With the increasing prices on fossil fuels, and even with LPG for cooking, I think the economic, the discussion on economic viability is only increasing day by day. I think then you have a question in terms of how do you structure the offering to the respective end use. So that's something which will be a specific discussion to the end use. Otherwise, I think the entire offering is only increasing better, both in terms of technology and economic viability.
Great, but then I just want to appeal to the audience, folks. We will have at least 5 to 10 minutes of Q&A in the end. So please warm up and shoot the questions while we'll keep on going, so that this discussion is more enriching and more full duplex in nature. Mateen, staying with you, if I put you in charge of a village which has a very bad quality grid supply of energy, and let's say a few hundred residents who are dependent morning and evening for productive and survival based electricity, how do you design this microgrid? What is the starting point? How is the wiring done? How do you collect the money? Can you unravel this for us?
Yeah, so it always has to be a hybrid model. So which basically means solar still has a very important role to play. So that can be a primary source, and any form of bioenergy can complement that. So that way, the overall energy mix is balanced, and you have a price point which can make sense for the end user. And then you have different segments of the community, whether it is households, then you have small and medium enterprises, which use energy, and then you also have certain productive loads which you can enable. So whether it is on agricultural based or certain other livelihood based activities. So this is the mix of it. And if there are certain industries which are available or present, I think then they can be an anchor customer in certain cases. So that's how the topography is, and then you have payment mechanisms. Thanks to the telecom, people understand what is prepaid and what are the kind of different packages. I think some of the learnings have come from that, which are replicated in the space. So then it becomes a little easier for people to sell the concept. A lot of technology also has gone in terms of metering, in terms of how do you limit certain usages, in terms of timing, in terms of certain applications. So then you have various remote monitoring devices to take preventive actions on theft and etc. So a lot is being done. Then the question is, how do you scale it up? So when you scale it up, then you can bring a lot of efficiencies which can further pass on to the end users.
So Matin, you typically have your personnel placed in that village so that they go door to door, collect prepaid money, or check the electricity quality, or check the wiring, or do you actually do parallel wiring vis-a-vis the grid wiring? How does it work on the ground?
Yeah, so we currently focus only on certain productive loads, and we are also in discussions where we can produce the gas and then offer the gas to a larger mini grid operators. So that way we will continue to be a fuel provider, so that we can enable the generation and bring down the overall cost. So that's the role which we are playing, and try to scale up that particular offering so that we can bring down the cost of generation per se, which can enable the entire ecosystem.
Thanks, Matin. Sandeep, anything you want to add in terms of actually making the microgrids tick in a village which is reasonably remote in nature, hence actually the microgrid, so people can tap into it? What are the difficulties and nuances of these things?
Totally, I have not been involved in the microgrid sort of economy. We looked at companies in that space, but have chosen not to invest because we weren't seeing scalability of that yet, right? So that's why we had chosen the consumer first approach rather than the microgrid approach initially.
Thanks, Sandeep. I don't believe our third panelist has arrived, so we will continue. Otherwise, I thought I will give him some limelight here. Banu, are you okay at the time?
We have time. We have time, Murli.
Okay, sounds good. We'll continue the discussion. Sandeep, what are the various ways, if I come up with a rural electrification or off-grid distributed kind of concept, either bio or otherwise, what is the starting point for my funding or the journey? What is the best way to do it?
So it's I think, the point that Matin brought up, that the biggest issue in this space is financing. And the financing is both from a risk financing perspective, from a, term loans for infrastructure. So there is I think a range of financing requirements that are needed. The maximum amount of activity that has happened is either happened at sort of grid level scale with renewables, not at the sort of decentralized efforts that are needed. So it's I think the starting point is to actually build the models. And I'll take this offline with Matin. I'd love to understand how they've built the models to drive both individualization or sort of customization at an individual use case level, but then also ability to scale that, say, across the country or across multiple countries. I think that if that is clear, then I think capital will be available. So there is capital available in terms of the impact funds are obviously looking at the space and have looked at the space. They're not that, the challenge is obviously that we don't have too many of those in the country, particularly in India. We don't have too much capital available for this space right now. So it's the formation of capital for that is required. The interesting thing that happened with D-Light is what started as a consumer product company has now actually become a consumer finance company. Our pay-as-you-go has become the backbone of the company, because you can go to larger and larger systems. You can provide systems at a house level, you can provide systems for commercial establishments and so on. And so effectively, you're starting off with very low consumer finance type models, which are well understood. There is, I think, again, as Mateen mentioned, there's a strong tie-in to the telecom approach. So you can use the telecom usage and telecom sort of payment patterns. So, do you pay your telephone bills on time? How often do you, take prepaid cards and so on, and use that to underwrite risk, and use that underwriting of risk to the energy sector. So, again, consumer energy has typically has not been really financed at the consumer level. So this is an interesting path that D-Light has taken, which is to say, okay, how do you underwrite risk in energy financing at the consumer level? And so, that can be scaled to larger and larger projects over time. And maybe that's another way to go, is drive the consumer finance up.
Very, very interesting journey and insights, Sandeep. Mateen, how are you going about in your journey on this impediment called financing? Without spilling the names and any secrets you're going through at this moment, please give your viewpoints.
Yeah, so we are looking at patient capital, and we're talking to a few larger players in this space who are willing to look at this particular segment with a long-term perspective. I think once we can build and have certain proven models, like which can be further financed by commercial capital with the volumes coming. So I think we are taking one step at a time. So at this point of time, it is going to be an interim support with going to be foundations or some of the impact funding, if I can say.
Yeah. Murli, hi. I think Vinisha is waiting online on the lobby.
Can somebody let him in?
Yes, I'm actually coordinating. 2 minutes. Meanwhile, you can just kick sort of.
I was gonna do the closing comments now, but but anyways, while we'll still keep running the show, Sandeep and Mateen, anything which I did not probe onto you and you want to add to the discussion in your perspective, because I didn't let the floor open for you.
I would ask Mateen this question. Mateen, are you seeing enough collaboration between companies in this space? Because of the systemic requirement, right? So there is everything from the consumer all the way to microgrids, to mini grids, to involving industry, and there are different companies that are sort of playing in these spaces. Are you seeing collaboration between companies?
Yes, but it is done selectively. It is not an evolved ecosystem, but it is happening selectively.
I think that's one area where there could be an industry body created around this whole area, which could provide more, more collaboration / looking at supporting the industry, whether it's lobbying for financing, whether it is. So it's something that maybe you can consider putting together.
Yeah, sure.
Hi, he's in there actually, Murli.
Good. We'll continue, Banu. Sandeep, my experience has been it's very little collaboration whatsoever I have seen, both in my professional life or as a board member at GAIL. I really, these are very patchy places. and technology has to be also developed by the grid provider a lot of times by sourcing IoT devices for metering, etc., all reverse engineering stuff. So it really needs somebody who actually can bring all the ecosystem players together.
Yeah.
So it becomes easy and we all will play to our nation, not to reinvent, which is not our core business.
Yeah. And this is something that, for example, whether it's e-commerce, whether it's fintech, other sectors that have scaled in India, one of the efforts that they have made at some point in their sort of journey is to create that industry association. So although you're competing in the market, you're also collaborating to ensure that you are, the playing field gets better for you.
No, this is a very important point you're making, Sandeep and Mateen, because if Mateen is in the business of giving sustainable electricity using biofuels, it's not his business to get into metering systems.
Yeah.
Or getting into wiring three-phase electricity into the productive loads. So these are all different businesses altogether, and somebody else's capital should come there to fund those things. So that's a very good observation. Banu, with your permission, and if there are no further comments, Mateen and Sandeep, we will proceed to any questions which are there from the audience.
No, as of now, no questions, probably. Vinesh is online, actually.
Hi, everyone.
Vinesh, we're just at the end of our discussion, but I'll ask you a few questions so that you can bring us the Southeast Asian perspective on energy poverty and how you see the pendulum moving on this. Can you just fill us in?
Yeah, so I think that just very quickly, in terms of the importance today that is placed for energy security, that has opened up, in my opinion, the opportunity for decentralized energy production. And the pendulum swing today is more towards the decentralization of energy. And I've seen the evolution of big power companies today becoming integrated energy companies, as well as infrastructure operators instead of power generation businesses. And this gives businesses like ours and many others in the region the opportunity to tap into the infrastructure that's was readily available, maybe a little bit out of date. But as you said earlier, each of us now get to look at our individual areas a lot better. And it is not easy for small new companies to need to own the entire supply chain or develop the entire supply chain for the energy solutions to become pervasive, right? So I think that that's happening, and it's happening more and more now in Southeast Asia. And that has come on the back of energy security, because if you're reliant on a mono a source of energy, the security, the perception of security today is it's a lot lower compared to back in the day where you had one reliable big supplier and that gave you security. So I think that this conversation about energy poverty today is becoming a lot more real, and there are solutions that can actually come to the fore to try to solve it because of this evolution of energy companies in a whole. And this has then enabled consumers to have options and a better level of awareness of what's available and what they can opt in for. So that's a little bit of what I see here.
Staying with you, Vinesh, if I have to ask you, if I'm giving you unlimited capital, what are the 3 new startup ideas you would suggest in this space?
Oh, wow. Okay, that's a great one. It's definitely going to be, one will be definitely around talent, because I feel that there are many ideas in this area, but the talent there's insufficient talent to be able to support these ideas, and that's a personal issue I've had in building Fat Hopes Energy. Right, you are not able to go out there and pick talent from equivalent business. There isn't one. So I think that there's been a lack. I mean, I'm an energy entrepreneur and I'm talking to you about talent today and a startup idea, but I think there's a big void in building talent, pipeline for talent to support these startups. And I think it's come due time that infrastructure and pipeline starts to be built so that we can take it to the next step. Companies and entrepreneurs can go to the next level, right? So I think that there's a big area of opportunity in energy talent development and grooming. And the other is really shared resources. If there were two very similar to the talent as well, is how can we be more structured and we can have a platform. So the idea is really to create a platform to plug in multi-energy producers and matching to consumers across the region. Because today with business growth, borders today become a lot more opaque, or there isn't that hard wall between countries anymore. And for a company to opt into a certain energy source in Malaysia, and then when they scale to Indonesia or to Thailand, they do not have those same options, I think is becoming something that's a big issue, right? So really how we can, and the main reason for it is, my view is the energy mix of the future is going to be ultra diversified and very localized, right? What resource do we have in each region will be the energy source that will be the forerunner. So really the second idea is how can we create a platform that equals the playing field for energy players across the region and enables consumers to net off emissions or to be cleaner in certain places, but yet still consume coal in places that is not available, but on an aggregate have a significant carbon impact. And the third would probably be in the gig economy, because I think that just like how feed-in tariff was introduced for solar, I think that idea can be scaled in a decentralized manner under an app where everyone can produce and can opt into a platform like that. So very similar, all three of the ideas I think are very similar, but really around sharing, but specifically for this industry.
Fantastic. Those are great insights, Vinesh, and I'm very glad, in spite of you not being here for the remaining part of the earlier part of the conversation, you're 100% in line with the opinions expressed, and that proves to the audience that my three panelists are thinking alike. And I will give the highlights. Folks, decentralization is the only way forward, and financing and ecosystem building will result in sustainable energy for the bottom of the pyramid or the underprivileged. Last but not least, talent has to be bred so that the whole thing will go in the long run. Thanks a lot, fellow panelists. Over to you, Banu.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Murali. Thank you, Vinesh. Thank you, Mateen. And thank you, Sandeep. It was a great session. We really enjoyed it. And thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.